I recently told a story about how I was listening to my favorite morning radio show. Yes, I still like morning radio. And one of the hosts talked about her friend who was pregnant and gotten fired from her job. One of the other hosts jumped in, no HR, no legal background, and started saying, yeah, that's too bad, but Georgia's a right to work state, so she can get fired for anything. You can fire someone even because they're pregnant. That's all legal because it's a right to work state. Phew. Yes, my head completely exploded, but I realized a lot of people confuse right to work and at will, so I wanted to quickly outline the two. First off, these are very American concepts. So those who have worked just in U.S. HR, employment compliance, if you've ever worked outside of the U.S., you know the rest of the world is kind of a totally different animal than the U.S. In the U.S., there is this concept called at-will employment. And I'll get to that second, because that's really what a lot of people mean when they say right to work. The rest of the world, oftentimes, you have legal rights to employment. So there must be certain types of cause to terminate employment. You may have extended notice periods on both sides, just completely different concepts. And that includes Canada. A lot of companies may expand into Canada without realizing that if you're in the US, you think California can be challenging to be in HR or employment compliance. Canada is way past that. There's so much to know. So what I'm talking about, right to work and at will, again, just United States, American concepts here. So right to work, I know it sounds like it would be that you have the right to keep your job or to work freely. But what right to work really has to do with is the union context. So without getting too much into history, years back, there was an act called the Taft-Hartley Act. And one of the things it did is allow states to decide that if employees joined a company and that company was unionized, whether employees who chose not to join the union could still be required to pay a portion of those union dues. So there's two types of states. There's right to work states. What that means is, state, if you join a unionized company, Acme Company is unionized, and you join them and you chose not to join the union, then you don't have to pay legal fees. Or the union fees. You're not required to pay a portion of those. But if you're in a state that's not right to work, then if you join a company that's unionized, even if you decide not to personally become a full union member, you still have to pay a portion of those fees. If you look at the map, whether a state is right to work or not, you can think of it, it's not completely aligned, but it's very close to, say, the 2020 election. So the states that voted for Trump, for example, tend to be right to work states. So people can join without paying the union fees. The states that tend to vote for Biden tend to be not right to work states because unions are a lot heavier in those. It tends to go along with each other. So that's what the concept of right to work means. It's really about joining a union, having to pay them the union fees. And you see people really passionately on both sides of this issue, by the way. Companies and business interests may say, look, if we have a union, an employee comes and joins us and doesn't want to join the union, why should they have to pay a portion of legal fees? It's like a tax on employees. Unions, on the other hand, will say, well, look, we have the legal responsibility to represent all employees, all non-management, let's say, employees' interests, even if they choose not to join the union. So they should pay some of that representation. So you can see where business interests and unions come from both sides. But anyway, point is, right to work is not about the ability of a company to fire someone. It's really about union dues and paying a portion of those union dues. So it's my personal mission to make sure people understand that right to work is not the same as at will. At will, on the other hand, again, this is a very American concept, the idea that you can terminate someone's employment for any reason, a good reason, a bad reason, as long as it's not an illegal reason. And so at will, sometimes you'll hear people say, look, this is an at-will state. And I have to suppress myself to not say every single state is an at-will state, even California, except Montana. You Yellowstone fans will know Montana can be an outlier for some things, so we'll get to that in a second. But at-will really means that someone, and this means is on the employee and the employer, unless you have an employment agreement or some sort of written contract for a set term, it means the concept that generally the presumption is that an employer or an employee can terminate that employment at any point in time without necessarily requiring a notice period. Again, a lot of places outside of the United States do have these required notice periods. But in the US, there's free labor. And you'll hear some people say that The US, this is one of our strengths for businesses, that we have more free labor that can move around from company to company. You can certainly know employees in companies that feel differently, but at will is this idea that you can terminate employment if you're the company or the employee for any reason, unless it's illegal. So illegal can mean there's federal law. So under the federal law, so this is in all 50 states, there's certain restrictions. You cannot terminate someone if there's a law that explicitly makes it illegal. So if you look at covered companies, and there's, kind of employee thresholds and things. So these laws don't automatically apply to every company. But once you get above 15, 25 employees, you start seeing a lot of these anti-discrimination laws come in. So you can't terminate someone because of their gender, because of their race, because of a disability, because of these different protected classes. So those can be limitations. So there may be a situation where someone is terminated from employment and they then file an EEOC charge, either a federal EEOC charge or with their state agency, if they have a state agency or local, that says, look, I was terminated, but it was really because of my protected class. So that's how those claims can come about. So that's some limitations to at will. At will does not mean, kind of like free speech doesn't mean you can say fire in a crowded theater, at will doesn't mean you can terminate someone for an illegal reason. So you have these federal reasons. There's also certain state-specific reasons. Sometimes they're called public policy. That idea is, based on a specific state law. They may say, look, in our state, we don't want companies to be able to terminate someone from employment because they're exercising a right. That may be attending jury duty. That may be whistleblowing. So states can also, or cities can craft their own limitations to what is at will. So when you hear someone say at will, just like that radio host, again, what he meant to say is, I'm sorry, your friend can be terminated because Georgia, again, like every other state other than Montana, which we'll still get to in a second, Georgia is an at-will state. That's what he should have said instead of right to work. But then when he said, it doesn't matter, when he had said you can fire someone for any reason, you can fire them because she's pregnant. There are federal laws that generally will prohibit that from taking effect as long as that company is covered by those laws if it's of a certain size. So that's just not right. There's at will, and you often hear people mistake this, but that does not mean you can fire someone for any reason. So I'd like to clarify that as well. There can also be certain times policies. So if a company has a policy and they haven't caveated enough to provide discretion, if they have a policy that says, for example, hey, employees, you will have 3 strikes for any type of discipline, and you create that in writing, again, you don't have the right caveats to provide some discretion. Someone can do something that's a really serious offense and the company terminates immediately, the person can come back and potentially raise a claim and say, look, you promised me I'd have 3 strikes. So those are certain other limitations. So there's some that are by law. Others, the employer can unintentionally create if the policies aren't crafted well. So that's one thing on our HR consulting side at Manager Method that we help companies with to ensure they have proper language. So I mentioned Montana. So again, Montana, I love Yellowstone. Montana does have limitations to at will, meaning that once you've been employed for a certain period of time, it used to be 6 months. It's now 12 months, which can be extended to 18 months. All has to be carefully explained. Again, I'm not at Montana Council, but it's interesting as information that in Montana, there are actual limits to at will. In the last year, there were some changes that were more business friendly. To clarify, for example, companies have freer reign to terminate employment for managers. I did extend out, again, that period from 6 months to 12 or potentially 18 months. But after that point in time, it can become more challenging. Those in public sector, government, for example, government is different than the private sector, which is like a private business, like a supermarket or some sort of for-profit business. In the public government sector, you have more of a right to employment. So that's where you see people bring the due process type challenges before they lose their employment. Public sector government is a different animal. But point is, to suffice is, take this away, right to work. Again, it does not mean at will. Right to work has nothing to do with whether you can get terminated for different reasons. It is about union fees. At will means that you can terminate someone for any reason, good reason, bad reason, as long as it's not an illegal reason. So the takeaway we always tell companies is, look, just think carefully. If you sense someone could potentially have a limitation, make sure you're thinking through that carefully. Contact your counsel if you need legal advice. Sure your policies through your HR consultants are buttoned up. But as I say, friends, do not let friends mix up right to work and at will. So now you certainly know the difference, and I hope you can all teach your friends and your favorite radio show hosts the same.